Hi, this is Terry from Fabric Junction in Sturgis, South Dakota. And today I'm going to show you how to add borders to your quilt. Whether your pattern calls for borders or you want to add some borders to it to make it bigger, here's the technique to add borders to keep your quilt square. As long armers, which we do a lot of long arming in our store, one of the most common problems is keeping the quilt square, and it happens most often as you're adding the borders that the quilt will change in directions. Many times we will measure a quilt and get two different measurements from the top one to the bottom one, and some of them can be pretty dramatic. To be off a ½ inch to an inch, that doesn't affect us, but when it gets up to 4 inches and 5 inches, that is really dramatic. So I've been asked, this is how I add borders to my quilt. As you see, I have one laying here. I lay my quilts out. If they're larger than this, I actually lay them on my bed. I don't put them on the floor anymore because I don't like to get up and down. But find a place to spread your quilt out, and then I take 3 measurements, and I don't measure the edge of the quilt, because I think we can stretch, it can be deceiving if you're working on the bias, all those reasons. But my first measurement is through the center. So I find my center and I measure. And this one is 34 and just a hair more, not a lot, just a hair. Then I find a seam towards the bottom. Sometimes it'll be this one, but I don't like to go that far if I can help it. But I find a seam and I measure that again. I follow the seam across and I measure, and this time I've actually got 34 1/4. And I do it a third time. So I'm going to go across the top. And again, that one says 34 1/4. And this one was just a hair more than 34, but not the full quarter. So that tells me that when I add my border to this, the top and the bottom should measure 34 1/4. So I will, since it's less than 45, I can just take a strip. I lay it out. Measure, and I got it, my numbers on the wrong side, but I want to get to my quarter. Looks like it's about right there. I do just a tiny snip. I'm going to double check that I got the right spot. Yep. Then you can put it on your, I fold mine in half on one this small. If I had a big wide border, I actually set it on my board. I use a straight edge, which I will grab something to show you exactly what I mean. I've got a little bitty snip. I line up my straight edge, straight across, grab my cutter, and cut. Okay, I have my piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to give it just a little press, just so I have a little bitty crease. And I've got everything ran away from me. Oh, there. I was going to say, I knew I had my pins somewhere. Find the right section. I'm going to go across the top, not down the side, because I tend to do tops and bottoms and then side to side. And I'm going to little crease there. Doesn't have to be a lot, but just a little, and you can even do just a finger crease. take my pieces and I match my center. Once I have that match, I straighten it out, and I'm going to show you what is going on with this one here, because this is kind of part of what we run into. Okay, we measured, we know 34 1/4 gave us our basic 3 measurements, but now I got to the top. I know this is correct. I get to the top and it's off just that tiny bit. Well, what you do is go ahead and match that up. And since that's the bigger, my feed dogs will take care of that little tiny bit that I'm off. If I'd have used this as my measurement across the top, all of a sudden my quilt is going to start growing. And if I used this exact measurement on this edge, on my bottom, maybe it was a hair smaller. We don't want that to happen. That's the reason I do 3 measurements, pin the center, then you pin it to this edge, and then you just ease that little tiny, it looked like about an 1/8, eases back into here so my quilt doesn't start to grow on me. On a longer quilt, you can lay this section down just like I have, and you can add a couple more pins. If you're comfortable sewing just the way it is, go for it. That's okay too. I do that a lot. So now that I know that that little dab that it was over is going to be eased into that side, I check this side. And traditionally, if one side is increased a little, sometimes the other side has too. And you can see there's just the tiniest bit. But I'm going to line up my edge. I will put a pin in. I will let this smooth out. Put a couple of more pins. And then I would sew. I can do the same thing with my bottom, and if my bottom is just that little smidge bigger, you see how it eases in. If the bottom actually measures just a little bit more, I mean not more, less. We want to go less, because let's say it's a little bit less. I can get it to ease the other way. And actually the bottom says it's right on the money. So only my top had just that tiniest bit more than what it needed. But that's how you keep it square. So the next step then is to go ahead and stitch it and then press it open. Do the bottom one the same way. Once it's pressed open, lay your quilt back down. Now do your measurement through the center, part on the top, part on the bottom. Find the most common number or the average. Sometimes I'll get 3 different numbers. 34 1/8, 34 1/4, and 34 3/8. Well, I picked the average. I'm back to 34 1/4. Add to it, and that'll help keep your quilt square so that you don't end up with one side being 3 inches longer than the other side. I hope this has been helpful for you, and do check out our website and stop by and see us and all the wonderful stuff, and add borders to your quilt. Don't be afraid to add them, but for those of us that are long armers, we love to work on quilts that lay square. So thank you again for watching, and do stop by and see us if you get close.